We have some exciting speakers to be with us today. And I am going to show you who those folks are. Are you able to see my screen just now?
Yeah.
All right, great. So our first speaker for today will be Sean Soendker, who's been the campaign manager for Clean Missouri since 2016. Many of us have bumped into Sean in various capacities for a decade or so, maybe even longer. It's hard to know sometimes how long these relationships have lasted. He's going to be talking to us about Senate Joint Resolution 38 that unfortunately passed in this legislative session. This is an attack on the Clean Amendment that many of us endorsed that passed on the 2018 ballot by 62% of the voters in Missouri. So we'll be excited to hear some updates from Sean. Lots is happening about SJR 38. And then we'll also have Tamara Fucile, who's Director for Government Affairs and Senior Advisor at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, one of our wonderful national partners that make sure that we know what's happening in Washington, D.C. Last Friday night, late, the HEROES Act passed, and HR 6800, and that has some additional coronavirus relief that our state badly needs. So Tamara's going to make sure that we know what's going on with the HEROES Act and what kind of steps and advocacy that we can do next. I do want to remind you some things about doing webinars and Zoom, and that's that it will be important for us to hear you by you muting and unmuting yourself. There's a little icon in the bottom left of the screen with a picture of a microphone that you can click on and off. And then there's also in the little picture of yourself up in the top right-hand corner a mute unmute button. So you can touch either one of those. If you're using a telephone, you use *6 to mute and unmute. And it helps the sound quality so that we don't hear the pans rattling in your kitchen or your dog barking, etc. If you will keep it on mute when you're not talking. You can either voice questions when I say, does anyone have any questions, and open up a Q&A period, or you can just type a question also into the chat feature if that's easier for you. The chat feature is down along the bottom of the page. And not too long after this webinar ends, we'll have a recording of it up on the website. If you have to leave a little bit early because of some appointment that you have, you can see the rest of it online later, and you can also share the link to that with your friends to keep growing our network of advocates in Missouri so that people know that we make these wonderful opportunities to learn available. Any questions about any of that? We're really delighted to see you here today. Looks like we have almost 50 people right now. We may have a few more drift in. Okay, well, without further ado, let me introduce Sean to be our first speaker. And I'm going to turn my camera off so that I can finish lunch without you watching me dribble it on my chin.
All right, well, thank you so much, Jeanette, and thank you so much, everyone, for the time today. I hope you're able to see my screen now. Yes. Someone give me a thumbs up. Great, wonderful. So I'm going to walk through where we're at now. The SJR 38 that passed out of the legislature last week, we believe will become Amendment 3. That official designation has not happened yet, in part because the General Assembly has not yet formally sent the resolution over to the Secretary of State. But what's on deck here in the next few days, couple weeks, is that the resolution will go over to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State will initiate the fiscal note process with the auditor's office, and then the ballot summary language, both what the legislature passed for the summary, which we sued on. I'm happy to answer questions on that if folks want, but also the fiscal note part, that'll all come together for the total ballot language. We don't know yet if we're going to be on the August or November ballot, but we'll know a whole lot more here in the next few days. So given those uncertainties, I'm just going to focus on what's actually in the proposal and why it's such a bad proposal that's bad for all the communities that we care about and bad for the state that we're trying to build. So before we get into what the legislature's response was to what the people did, I'm going to walk through why the Clean Missouri redistricting reforms had so much support from reformers across the political spectrum, why every major anti-gerrymandering organization endorsed the Clean Missouri policy. And that's because the core elements of a fair map plan are to have some independence in the process. So it's not just politicians and partisans who are doing the map drawing. The second core pillar of a fair maps plan is to have rules that everyone can see, that everyone knows what they mean, so that everyone can know that they're getting a fair shake. So whether you're from a small town or a big city, whether you're tend to support Republicans or tend to support Democrats, everybody can see that the rules that are used apply equal to everyone, and no one's got an unfair advantage. And then the third big part of every good fair maps plan is transparency, so that there's a shared data set, so everybody knows what data got used to craft a plan, and so that we know that data wasn't used to draw a district for a particular person or scoot them into a different district so they could be primaried against another partisan, something like that. So all of those pieces, the independence, the transparency, and the criteria are in what voters approved. And that's a big reason why what we passed in 2018 passed by with the huge margins that it did, with support from everyone from Senator Jack Danforth to the AARP to the League of Women Voters, right on down the line. I'll skip over this a little bit. So what the legislature is proposing is not the system that we had in 2011 or 2001. If you get nothing else out of this conversation, it's that what the legislature is proposing is not what we had before. It is worse and terrible in some very specific ways, and it does roll back all the good things that voters passed, but then it replaces the voter-approved reforms with something unlike Missouri has ever seen, and in a few ways that I'm going to walk through here, unlike anything we've seen in recent decades in the United States. So it's not just me saying this. Senator Jack Danforth, you may have seen in the Post-Dispatch a couple weeks ago, wrote about how what they are proposing in the legislature, this was written a couple days before it actually passed, is indeed more extreme than we in Missouri have ever seen. There's three buckets of changes to what came out of the legislature last week. One, they've got a new process that puts partisans in the driver's seat. It actually gives more control to the state Republican and the state Democratic parties for picking commissioners than they've ever had before. And then it also moves the work from out of the sunlight using a shared data set. The situation or the system that they're proposing would move all the work to secretive back rooms where deals get made and where stuff gets messy. They also gut all of the rules that are in the Constitution now for fairness that keep communities together. And then they propose new criteria that weaken or gut everything that voters passed. So in their plan, there is a weaker, worse standard to protect voters of color. They flip the fairness and competition rules on their head. And I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. They actually add new arbitrary rules that would break up neighborhoods and communities. So for all the talk about how we hear from supporters of this gerrymandering plan that they want to keep communities together, they actually add arbitrary new things that are going to cut up communities in very specific ways. And then they are going to try to change who even counts in redistricting maps. And if that wasn't enough, so they're going to rig the system in terms of how the maps get drawn. They want to rig the rules, rig the math, and then they want to make it so that it's harder for anyone to even have their day in court if maps get rigged in the future. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, because this is another one of those places where their proposal is for Missouri to be first worst in the country on something that's really, really important. So on the process piece, I mentioned this before. Their proposal actually makes it for sure removes the nonpartisan state demographer. Getting rid of those checks and balances in the Constitution now is a key goal and a public goal of the supporters of this proposal. But in place of a process we have now, where there's checks and balances, where the demographer does draft plans and then the commissions can make changes and review those drafts, what they're proposing is a process where partisans drive the whole show. They want to make the commissions bigger, so there's more lobbyists, more political consultants in the room. They would give the two state parties more power for picking House commissioners that they've never had before. And they've also written the proposal in such a way that they could pass final plans and never disclose the data that's used for those plans. So they've built in a loophole on the front end. They also wanted to change the criteria and math. So I'm going to go a little bit into the weeds here, but it really does matter both in terms of who is represented and what that means in terms of policy and the state that we want to have for the future. So all the fairness rules would be gone or gutted. They would explicitly allow for extreme gerrymandering rather than the current rules say we should have as little gerrymandering as possible. And then we can talk about this later if folks want, but they're weakening the language, the constitutional protections right now for voters of color. On the population standard, every state in the United States right now counts everyone for redistricting purposes. Every person in this state. Missouri has been doing this since 1875. It's in the Constitution since at least 1875, counting all of the people who are in the state borders. You take the total population, you cut it into 34 districts or 163 districts or whatever the number of districts is, you count everybody. And every state does this right now. It's a constitutional requirement that we've got right now, and they want to take that away. And the sponsor of SJR 38 was pretty explicit about what the goal of this is. There's been a national push from a small group of gerrymandering masterminds to move away from total population. They want to open the door to what's called citizen voting age population, or essentially using the total number of eligible voters to draw maps. Their theory is that has a little bit of elegance to it, of course, like why would we not count voters? What that means in practice is that you don't count kids when it comes to who's in the maps, and you don't count non-citizens in terms of who's in the maps and who's a part of the state population. The other side, the proponents of this may want to have a xenophobic or a racist conversation, but the reality is that the overwhelming impact of such a proposal would be on families and communities with children. 2% of our population right now, 2% of our 6 million Missourians are not citizens. 23% are age 17 and under. They're not yet eligible to vote. I've got data in there, sorry, from a different presentation. There's also a very real race equity implication to what this would mean for Missourians. So if you don't count kids and non-citizens, 21% of white Missourians are under the age of 18, but then it's 1 in 4 African-American Missourians, it's more than 1 in 3 Latinx Missourians. And so if they don't count, there's a very real impact on who's represented and who's part of who counts in Jefferson City. The goal of such a change has been pretty explicit. Thomas Hoffeller, who some of you may have heard about in the last few years, he wrote in a memo a couple years ago that a switch to citizen voting age population is a switch that he was proposing, would be advantageous to Republicans and non-Hispanic whites. So the impact and what this is about are pretty clear and pretty straightforward. So I'll come back to that. Folks may have questions. Another change that is in Amendment 3, SJR 38, is that they want to use the formula that's in the Constitution right now to limit partisan gerrymandering. They want to flip that on its head so it actually creates an outer limit to how gerrymandered maps can be. The efficiency gap is simply a statistical measurement that allows us to see how skewed maps are. It's a way to quantify this map is biased in a way that benefits one party or the other. This graph, this bell curve that I'm showing y'all right now, this is actually all of the efficiency gap scores for all of the state legislative plans that you can find at planscore.org. So that's a national database, a national website that evaluates and looks at gerrymandering across the country. So of all of these redistricting plans in all the states, you see that most state plans are in the middle, right? So there's a couple natural bumps. Those 2 bumps in the middle of the bell curve are, that's where things fall naturally if politicians and political consultants aren't trying to skew the system. Then you see bumps a little bit farther out. Those bumps that are a little bit farther out, that's where you see partisans trying to put their fingers on the scale. So this is a political problem. This is a human problem. If political actors are allowed to skew the maps, they will, and so that's why there's such bipartisan support on the part of voters to not having rigging of maps. What SCR 38 would allow, what Amendment 3 would allow, is actually a 15% efficiency gap. And that means nothing in terms of like to most normal folks, but it is so extreme, a 15% efficiency gap, that it is worse, it is more skewed than any state house plan has been in the last 4 decades. The last time any state has had a plan this skewed, so far as we're aware, is 1979 in Mississippi. So it's worse than Wisconsin's got right now. It's worse than what Democrats did in Maryland to the congressional map. It is that bad, and they are creating essentially an invitation to, you can go all the way up against these outer edges. And if that wasn't bad enough, their proposal would then make it harder for anyone to unrig maps in court. They want to create new barriers to who has standing. And then they want to create restrictions on what judges can do, even if maps are shown to be illegal and judges find that they're illegal. There was a good New York Times story today that we can send around afterwards if folks are interested, that breaks this down a little bit. But they are trying to essentially say that judges can only adjust individual lines to address the very specific claims that are being brought by plaintiffs. They would not, but their language, what the legislatures propose, would make it so that a judge can't just throw the whole thing out and say, this thing is so jacked, y'all didn't follow the rules, you got to start over. That's exactly what happened to our current state Senate maps. They got thrown out totally because the initial plans didn't follow the rules. And that's something that just happens with some regularity across the country, is maps don't follow the law, someone goes too far, someone doesn't read the fine print, and then the process needs to start over. I think the last thing I'll lift up is that before the House passed what we expect to become Amendment 3, the House Rules Chair, one of the top Republicans in the House, indicated that he knew that the state Republican Party knew that this plan was flawed. He talked about it on the record in a House Rules Committee. He said, I've been told by the state GOP that there are errors and corrections that need to be made on this. And then the House passed SCR 38 without making any change, without addressing any of those errors. So regardless of where we come down on any of these other issues, it seems pretty clear to me that we shouldn't be putting constitutional amendments with errors into our Constitution for the long haul. So I will pause there. This is a terrible plan. I can go worse, but I'll keep it polite and then kick it back to you, Jeanette, for any sort of questions or however you want to handle that from here.
Thanks, Sean. What about the lawsuit that's been filed? Is there anything that you can tell us about that?
Yeah, so we filed suit on Monday. The legislature wrote its own ballot title instead of kicking that to the Secretary of State. There are some very real factual problems with what the legislature passed. For instance, one of the bullets says they're going to create independent commissions that they're not actually creating, and they aren't independent. The ballot summary language says they're going to ban lobbyist gifts, and they're not banning lobbyist gifts. And then the other bullets have language that's so broad or misleading that that we think it goes too far and actually serves to mislead voters.
Yeah, we're familiar with this issue at Empower Missouri, because in 2014, a sales tax that was going to be dedicated to transportation was put on the ballot by the legislature, and they wrote the ballot language in concert with what their polling told them had to be said to get a yes vote on it. So we actually took the state to court about that, and probably you and I should have a conversation about some of the things that we learned in that process that maybe can be somewhat helpful to you in your lawsuit process.
Yeah, I think that sounds great.
The great thing about us suing, even though we ultimately lost the lawsuit, is that we got tens of thousands of dollars worth of earned media about what was wrong with the language through the lawsuit that helped us win the measure when it got voted on. So it's important that all of us be telling our friends and neighbors what we find out about the language of this through the lawsuit, so that we're laying that foundation to have the vote go the way that we want when it eventually gets to the ballot box. So everybody participate in that. Are there other questions for Sean? Feel free to put them in the chat box or unmute yourself to ask. Okay. Well, I see some of our board members are on the call with us today. Chris and Linda, I see there, maybe some others too, but those are the two who pop up to me just on my opening screen here. Our board voted in February that we would oppose all attacks on the Clean Amendment, and so we testified against SJR 38, and we've already, signed the endorsement form to say that we are on the no side on this. So stay tuned to Empower Missouri and to the Clean Missouri Facebook page. And what all do you have? You have a Twitter feed and a Facebook page, and
we got all the things.
the website. Anything you want, they got it to keep you informed. And we will be working with Sean and the whole team to preserve the right to have fair maps. That's just, thank you for bringing out the racial equity pieces around what it means when we don't count kids. When I was a state representative, the 59th district has the International Institute in it. So my district had a higher than other parts of the state percentage of people who were non-citizens, but there were also a whole lot of kids in my district. And you can say, well, we're all going to represent the same number of voters, so why does it matter? Well, you also you represent the people in your district who are non-voters too. They need state services, and it's unfair to not get to count a volume of people that ultimately you as a lawmaker are trying to be faithful to their needs, whether it's for affordable housing or food security or anything else that you might be responsible for them about regarding public policy. So not counting children is just unexcusable, and not counting non-citizens is inexcusable as well. Most of the non-citizens in my district were on their way to becoming citizens, or at least on their way to having some legally documented status, because a lot of them were from war-torn countries where they were simply refugees. So it's unfair not to count those folks.
Yeah, they're all our neighbors, they're all our kids, it's all our family members. So yeah.
Linda.
I do have a question. Is it okay with you if we share the video of this when it's put up on Empower Missouri's website?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Sean would be careful not to say anything in this forum that he wouldn't say anywhere publicly. You just
I try to behave.
You can't control who joins something like this, and so we don't reveal our deep, dark secrets around campaign strategy on a public webinar. All right, very good. Well, thank you, Sean, for being here today, and we will move on to another very important topic, which is, certainly Missouri has at this point 14–15% unemployment. The last time I looked, it may have gone up some since then. I'm not sure. Our state revenue was way down. Our governor's already done 2 rounds of withholding, and is saying that another round of withholding will be coming very shortly. Clearly, COVID-19 has Missouri on the ropes, and so we need some help from the federal government. Our state is designed to fail from a revenue standpoint. We have done everything that we could to tie our own hands about our ability to raise revenue in Missouri. We have these Hancock Amendment revenue caps, and you have to put things on the ballot to raise taxes here, but the legislature can cut taxes, so we are about $4 billion right now below our own revenue caps, making it impossible to fund essential state programs and services. If we're going to get out of this mess, we can't manage it with how we're designed in Missouri right now. We're going to need help from the federal government. And thankfully, we have Tamara Fucile here with us today from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Tamara's going to catch us up on what's happening in Washington, D.C. To try to address the continuing economic crisis and basic human needs crisis across our nation. Thanks for being with us today, Tamara.
Thanks so much for having me. Good to see you all. And I will be certain not to reveal any dark, deep secrets that the bots might get. So anyways, I was invited on to chat a little bit about what's happening at the federal level. So I thought I would just sort of start with probably a lot of information that you know, but just sort of the overall picture, what we're seeing in federal trends, and then where we are in the legislative process. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. All right, so hopefully you all can see that. But as you all know, as a result of the pandemic, the unemployment rates have skyrocketed. Just today, there were new numbers out today showing that almost 40 million Americans have filed unemployment claims over the last 9 weeks. We expect this to rise, and it is putting quite a lot of pressure on systems as folks are unable to earn wages. One enormous benefit is that when the CARES Act was passed, there was pandemic unemployment assistance that was included as part of that, which has really helped a number of folks go a long way in making up some of those income shortfalls. But we know that it's, as it currently stands, it will run out too soon. And we desperately need to take steps to make sure that this unemployment insurance remains available to people considerably further than was initially put into place into the CARES Act. Let's see, how do I turn this? Sorry, how do I change the slide? Sorry, I'm just having problems figuring out how to, there we go. Another thing that we know as a result of the pandemic is that food insecurity has risen sharply. Actually, over the last couple of months since February, Missouri has seen 14% increase in the number of people who are applying for food assistance or SNAP benefits. That is unprecedented. That is unlike any increase in applications for food assistance we have ever seen. Back during the Great Recession, we saw an increase of 4%, just to put it in perspective. So the amount of people who are having a hard time putting food on the table is growing astronomically. And nationally, Missouri is right on trend. We're seeing, of the states that have reported their April data, we're seeing 14% across the country as the average increase. We know that SNAP assistance benefits are modest, but that they are also among the benefits that are most quickly spent. And so both provide the food assistance benefit and the health benefit, as well as being a big injection for the economy. Moody's and CBO has said that it is the best bang for the buck in terms of economic stimulus that the country can do. And then, as we were just chatting about, the pandemic has just decimated state budgets across the country. Unlike the federal government, as you all know, states need to balance their budget every year, and with revenues way down, the states and localities are not taking in nearly what they have seen before. When you compare this to what we saw in 2001 and in 2009 with the Great Recession, this is what states are experiencing right now is unprecedented. We have and we know that as a result of these types of revenue gaps, we're going to start to see massive layoffs of people across the states. Back in the Great Recession, the largest percentage of those layoffs actually came from schools, and everybody, I'm sure, on this phone appreciates how difficult a situation the educational systems are facing right now as they're trying to work through remote learning and other possibilities. So the idea that they're going to have to start up in the fall with even fewer resources available is quite scary. And I also just want to chat about, another area that we're watching is the number of folks who are being impacted because they are not able to meet their rent. We know that pre-coronavirus, and that's what this chart shows, pre-coronavirus, we didn't have enough assistance going out to help housing assistance, to help all of those who are eligible. Only about 1 in 4 people who are eligible for housing assistance in a regular day are able to get assistance. And even though the CARES Act provided some additional funding and additional resources to help help people stave off foreclosure and eviction, it is nowhere near the need. And we are greatly concerned that the population that pre-coronavirus was really on the, on the edge of a, financial ruin, could really sort of tumble past that brink, potentially into homelessness or severe housing instability. So we are really focused on how we can address that, and just sort of highlighting that, across all programs that I've talked about, housing is just one that I happen to have a slide for to illustrate this point, but the overwhelming implications this has for minority populations. African Americans are much more likely to experience homelessness or housing insecurity, as are American Indians or Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians, as well as Hispanics. So it just sort of, as we have seen across issue, the minority communities have just really been devastated by this pandemic in a way that has just been considerably harsher than for white communities. So as was mentioned earlier, on Friday, late Friday night, the House passed the HEROES Act, which is the next step in a large coronavirus relief legislation. It provides significant resources to address all of the issues I just mentioned and more. It provides almost $1 trillion to state and localities to help avoid layoffs, increases food assistance in particular, increases the maximum benefit allowable for SNAP to 15%, as well as extends the amount of time that this increased assistance can be available. It injects billions of dollars into housing assistance, both to address homelessness and to help those who are housing insecure. It includes relief to help target unemployment insurance to those who are furloughed or out of work as a result of the virus, as well as a number of other provisions, including helping to make the government operate more effectively, such as increased funding for census. We know that they have had to put their operations on hold as a result of the pandemic, and it includes investments for items such as voting security as we head into the elections. We know that that's a great concern about how elections are going to be run during this crisis. So the question is, where are we now? The House has passed this package. It has been labeled as a liberal wish list by the opposition, which I think many of us in the progressive world kind of laugh at, because while this is a $3 trillion package that will address health and economic concerns as a result of the pandemic, most of us in the progressive environment think that it could have gone even further. So this idea that it's some unrealistic wish list just feels doesn't match with the facts on the ground. But while the House went forward with acting on this, we have not seen the Senate indicate any interest in taking up a subsequent coronavirus legislation. Instead, we have seen Leader McConnell really lean into the narrative that there is no reason and no impetus to act now, that we should, between the Families First legislation and the CARES Act, that Congress has put trillions of dollars into the economy, and we should just sort of wait and see what happens. That really runs counter to things that pretty much every mainstream economist will tell you, including the Trump-appointed Federal Reserve Chair, Powell, who recently said, yes, this is going to be expensive in terms of what's needed to boost the economy, but not acting is considerably more expensive, and Congress needs to do more now. But so even in the face of that, we have not heard any sort of instance from or inclination from Senate majority that they are going to move forward on the next coronavirus package at all in the short term. We hear a couple of messages coming out of the majority. One, like I just said, we just spent a lot of money. Let's wait and see what happens. There's no rush. Two, we hear, states and localities don't need more money. They just need more flexibility. If we just provide them with flexibility with the funds that we've already given them, that will solve all of their problems. You all are much closer to state budgets than I am, but I'm sure that you would agree with me that that is not the case. Missouri cannot make up for the shortfall just by getting more flexibility with the funding that they already have. They need an influx of cash to be able to provide their basic services. Another argument that we hear is, relief provided in previous packages, such as unemployment insurance, aren't actually solving the problem. Instead, they're providing a disincentive for people to actually pick themselves up by their bootstraps and get back to work and move forward. We've heard over and over again that the unemployment insurance benefits provided in CARES was overly extravagant, and as a result, people would rather stay home than go to work. But we all know that there are jobs right now for people to go back to work too. Things are closed, customers aren't coming. And so this idea that the only reason we have such high unemployment numbers is because unemployment insurance is so generous is laughable. So where does that leave us? Our primary goal at the center is to work to try and pressure the Senate majority to feel the need to move forward with significant investments to address the health and economic concerns of the coronavirus. Senators Blunt and Senator Hawley are both key to this effort. Both of them are senators who have a lot of sway in DC. Both of them have shown some openness to thinking about how we can provide relief to households that are hurting, but both of them have neither, but we need to continue to apply pressure to so that they feel the need to act. I think I will just stop there and take any questions because there's so much that these pieces of legislation cover, and so happy to sort of to jump wherever is most helpful.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tamara. There is a question in the chat box that refers to the slide that was about budget shortfalls. You had a slide that showed what the 2001 recession, the 2008 Great Recession.
Yes.
Projections for now. The question was, are these numbers for budget shortfalls for states in general?
Yeah, those numbers were for overall total states, and actually just today we released new numbers that are even higher than those figures. We didn't have an updated graphic that I could use today. We're now estimating, I think it's more than a $750 billion shortfall nationwide just for state governments, which is unlike what we've seen in the last two recessions.
Yeah. So Tracy McCreary, who's a state representative here in Missouri, Tamara, a wonderful champion on many issues that we care about, asked what should we ask our senators to do?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one, ask them to move quickly. Households cannot wait. We need to get relief out to the economy, to the states, to families who are struggling now. This idea that we can wait and see what happens. We know what happens when you wait. Families and households start to fall through the cracks, and sometimes you get to a point where you just can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Delay only increases the overall costs of what we're going to need. I think that there's a couple of issues that are key. I think one, acting quickly. Two, making sure that whatever relief is put into place is responsive to this crisis. We want to make sure that relief, whether that's unemployment insurance or food assistance or state fiscal relief, that is available as long as market conditions warrant. And so we're asking for Congress to tie relief to economic conditions or to the labor market. And that will make sure that we don't keep benefits on for too long and we don't shut them off too early. There's a lot of uncertainty around this crisis. And so, any date that they choose is going to be wrong. And it would be, it's the smartest policy to make these things so that they are responding to what's actually happening as opposed to somebody's best guess.
Agreed. And Michelle Miller asked, is when we get replies from Blunt and Hawley, is there someone that those should be kind of reported to so that we're able to track movement on what they say or any clues?
Yeah, that would be great. I think, is it Louisa who you all work with?
We work with Louisa Warren and Rachel Tucker.
Yeah, either one. If you're able to.
But what I'd suggest is that people report it to us, to me or Christine Woody, who's our lead on hunger, and we'll keep kind of a compilation that we'll send on to our friends in DC.
That'd be fantastic.
We work with Center on Budget. We work with FRAC. We work with Mazone. We work with Bread for the World. Good to see Zach Schmidt on the call today, who's our regional organizer for Bread for the World. And so we let all of our national hunger partners know what's going on when we get messages here in Missouri.
That would be great.
Yeah. Are there other questions for Tamara?
I also would just lean in on one other point, and this the potential increase for food assistance benefits by 15% is an issue that has been like the last item to get cut from the last couple of legislative packages. We understand that like it has been in the mix up until the last minute, and then it hasn't made it through the door. And so we're really asking folks to sort of focus on that, because that additional food assistance, that works out to $25 a person per month. It's a small amount, but it goes a very long way in helping households and helping the economy. And we're nervous that if we don't get it this time around, that we will not be able to get that increase. And it really is such a modest amount.
Right. And it's so needed as well. Many people don't know how they calculate food stamps. It's based on a thrifty food plan model, and our average in Missouri for a long time has been around $1.30 per person per meal, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more, but that's only about half the cost of what the USDA says it would cost to make a nutritious meal, especially if you use one of the more generous food plan models, like the moderate cost or the low cost food plan model instead of the thrifty food plan model. So clearly the S in SNAP is meaningful. So it's a supplemental food program. SNAP was never meant to buy all of your food. It's to buy some of your food so that you have a little bit more of your cash left over for other essentials like the cost of your housing, your transportation, your children's clothing, things that are absolutely essential. So program that really needs an increase because we're not helping people have enough to eat. Josephine says, how about will getting in touch with our senators be of any help?
Absolutely.
Yep. I think so as well. We have had calls so far with Senator Blunt's staff and Senator Hawley's staff. We're trying to arrange for more of that. We also went to our friends at the Missouri Academy of American Pediatrics, wonderful allies on hunger issues, and one of their doctors has submitted a guest column to the Springfield News Leader. We're trying to, follow up with their editorial board to make sure that runs. If you're interested in writing a guest column about the need to increase the SNAP benefit or some of the other provisions that are in CARES, money for housing or how to improve the earned income tax credit or the child tax credit, et cetera, we'd be glad to help you, help you get that sent to the right person so that it could appear in a paper that it would really matter in. That's another great way that we can get this done. And then when one of those runs, if you become part of our food security network or our affordable housing coalition, et cetera, we let you know, hey, something ran today. Would you please, amplify it through social media? And how about writing a letter to the editor saying, I read the column about, and it's so true. I volunteered a food pantry, and we've got cars lined up, all the way around 3 blocks waiting for food at our food pantry right now. When you give those first person on the ground accounts of what's going on with the people you serve, it really matters a lot. So that's another way that you all can help us, in addition to directly contacting your senators, is you can help us reach them through the media. So work with us on that. Later, I'll be giving you some suggestions, including the Twitter handles for our senators and our U.S. House members, and who voted yes on the CARES Act, on the HEROES Act, and who voted no, so that you can thank the yes votes if that was your U.S. representative, and you can say, well, I'm disappointed to see that you voted no on the CARES Act, because here's what's going on in my community that makes me think we really need that aid here in Missouri. So we'll have you follow up with your U.S. representatives. May cause them to think differently about how they vote next time if they get a little pushback. So other questions for Tamara? Oh, there's maybe something down here I haven't read. Let's see here. What about the rental crisis, Derek says?
So I think that we are really, I'm not exactly sure by rental crisis what exactly you're referring to, but we are very concerned about the number of people who really could slip into severe housing insecurity. We know right now there's a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions, but that does not mean that once the moratorium lifts that people aren't in arrears. And the idea that people who have not had income or been out of a job can suddenly come up with the amount that they have been unable to pay over this pandemic is unrealistic. So we think that there is significant need for billions of dollars of investments into rental assistance for households. We think it's important to that rental assistance be targeted in a way so that it goes to households as opposed to developers. Because we want to make sure that it gets to the families who need it.
Right. Yeah, you may not know, Tamara, that we're also the official state partner of the National Low Income Housing Coalition.
Oh, good.
And they have estimated that we definitely need $100 billion in this package to help with rental assistance. And Derek is referring to the fact that for every 100 units of affordable housing, affordable meaning paying 30% or less of your income for your housing costs, looking at families that are 30% area median income, we have 42 units available for every 100 needed in Missouri. So we have a horrible housing crisis in our state. And there are parts of the state that are worse than that or somewhat better than that. But our statewide numbers, I think, are 42 units available for each 100 needed. Clearly, lots of people over 30% area median income also have trouble affording their housing.
Okay.
Other questions? And somebody may need to mute their line. We're hearing a little background noise there. Any last question for Tamara?
All right.
Linda wiggled her hand. It's kind of like that auction thing. I was ready to call on her, but she was just stretching a little bit. So, all right.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tamara, for being on, and you're certainly welcome to stay with us, or if you need to get on with your day, we'll understand that as well. And thank you so much for all the wonderful resources that you bring to us. We're often sharing background papers that you've written, your blogs, etc. It's just really wonderful material. We very much believe in evidence-based public policy at Empower Missouri, and you're one of our best sources of good analysis.
So glad to hear that. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so let's have a quick review here of what happened in our legislative session in Missouri, which ended on May the 15th. So we'll go back to sharing my screen with you. So for anyone who's joining us for the first time, if you're not familiar with our mission, we work to secure basic human needs and equal justice for every person in our state through coalition building and advocacy. And what we're working toward is a Missouri in which all people have food, shelter, and justice. There are some undergirding principles that we have: that adequate nutrition, affordable housing, and equal justice are essential for Missouri's success, that all structural oppressions ought to be recognized, challenged, and dismantled, that evidence-based public policy is foundational for those who govern, and that the lawmaking process is truly accessible to all in our state. We want to live in a place that's like that. We try to help advocates in our state know the social justice implications of legislation, both in our General Assembly and in the U.S. Congress, in 6 issue areas: affordable housing and homelessness, criminal justice, economic justice, health and mental health, human rights, and hunger. And we have someone on these Empowering You webinars every time that will speak on at least one of those topics. And we try to rotate it around so that everybody's topic gets touched on sometime. Related to this legislative session, it began on January 8th and it concluded on May 15th. Due to the pandemic, the legislative spring break, which was set to go from March 17th to the 30th, began a week earlier in the Missouri Senate and was extended until April 27th when they came back to finish up the budget process. And we were told just do the budget process and some things related to coronavirus response. But instead, a smorgasbord of bills were touched on. And I saw that on the call we have Representative Tracy McCreary and Representative Tish Gunby. There may be others as well that will maybe offer us some perspective on that at the conclusion of this presentation. Thank you for being on the call today, Representative McCreary and Representative Gunby. 51 bills became truly agreed and finally passed during our abbreviated session. That included 13 budget bills, 5 supplemental budget bills, 16 House bills, 13 Senate bills, 2 Senate concurrent resolutions, and 1 Senate joint resolution, SJR 38 that we heard about earlier from Sean. The truly agreed and finally passed status for one bill, SB 782, was rescinded when the Senate discovered that a provision had been inserted into it in a less than a transparent manner, but apparently on the summary of the bill, someone had written "don't dig deep" by the part that was inserted in a less than transparent manner. Lesson to yourself here: writing "don't dig deep" on something is not a good way to hide it. July 14th is the final date for Governor Parson to take action on truly agreed and finally passed bills. The bill reviews have begun. We've been contacted this week by the liaison from the Department of Corrections to get our opinion on Senate Bill 600. And we have to have that turned in by close of business tomorrow. So bill review process has started. The governor has signed 4 bills so far. It really mattered that our advocacy network spoke up in the 2020 session. We organized or joined opposition in some cases. Sometimes we were the leaders, sometimes we were in the choir, but we were able to stop a number of bad ideas, like bills that would have imposed harsh new work hour documentation on SNAP recipients, even parents with young children, a ban on access to cash at the ATM if you're on temporary assistance for needy families. It wasn't clear that even if that became law, whether the federal government would allow Missouri to do it, and that they blocked Kansas from doing that in the past, but that wasn't enough reason not to take up some hearing time on that in the House. There was a bill to speed up the eviction process by 5 days. It's already a faster process than other court procedures are, but the sponsor, who is a landlord, felt that we needed to create an even faster track for eviction. There were bills to create more adult certification hearings for juveniles charged with offenses, even though we passed to raise the age in 2018 in Missouri. HJR 106 would have required work hour documentation for those on Medicaid or those not exempted on Medicaid. And then there were some voter suppression bills that would have created new strict voter photo IDs. We know that some people delay renewing their photo ID just because of poverty. and not being able to vote in an election because your driver's license is expired would be a real tragedy. So we worked against those. And then there was a slew of bills that if you're also on the mailing list for PROMO, our state LGBTQIA justice lobby, you know that there were a lot of anti-transgender bills. There are also some language about gender dysphoria and some foster care bills, House Bill 1414 and Senate Bill 653, that we worked with ACLU and PROMO to get that language removed. And we were able to kill all of those bills, thankfully. So it's kind of sad that we have to celebrate what we were able to get not passed, but it is good to stop some of these bad ideas. We're making real progress on some things, and because of the abbreviated session, we weren't able to get some things across the finish line that we really wish that we had. Representative McCreary has been very active on trying to reform Missouri's outdated, cruel, and medically inaccurate HIV-specific criminal statutes, and has a bill on that. Let's see, yours was House Bill 1692, I believe, but the Holly Rader bill, 1691, sponsored by a majority party member, was voted 16-0 in Judiciary. And we were really hoping to get that passed this year, but the abbreviated session got in the way of that. There was some progress made toward getting the low-income housing tax credit program restarted, and we were anxious to see it reformed so that it would do a better job granting more housing and greater stability to those with low incomes around housing. We also were working toward an elder parole bill. It was about a particular set of sentences, those that had been sentenced to life without parole for a minimum of 50 years. House Bill 2034, that was moving well in the House when we ran out of time. We were excited to see some clean slate expungement bills filed that would seal records of arrests where there were no convictions, or even also seal records related to certain types of convictions, not the most violent crimes, but say crimes that are common related to drug offenses, stealing small kinds of property to buy drugs. When people can't seal their records, often they can't find employment, they can't find housing, they can't get into various educational programs. So there are a lot of collateral consequences to incarceration, and clean slate expungement makes that more automatic and would help a whole lot more people. So we're looking forward to continuing working on that. There's a needle and syringe exchange program that could help reduce HIV transmission that was moving well. And again, we had trouble there because of the lack of time. There was also a bill to let more people with felonies work in businesses that sell or serve alcohol or sell lottery tickets. So we ran out of time on those good things and expect us to work on those again next year. There are some bills that did pass that we're going to take a position on. We're going to be asking the governor to sign House Bill 1414 and Senate Bill 653. That's good foster care reform and was a priority of the Kids Win Missouri coalition that we're a member of. And then we also are great supporters and friends of the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Abuse, that being so connected. That ends in violence instead of abuse. It's MCADSV. Sorry to get the last word of that wrong, but they were able to pass a bill, Senate Bill 569, related to sexual assault survivors. So we will be asking for that to be signed. Also, the committee substitute, or the conference committee substitute number 2 for Senate substitute for Senate committee substitute for House Bill 1768 included a good reform to TDD and CID, these taxing districts that are very local, a change to how those tax incentives are offered to make that more equitable. So we'll be asking for that to be signed as well. We think we'll be asking for Senate Bill 2046 to be signed, that has the Fresh Start Act in it, making it more possible for formerly incarcerated people to get professional licenses and registrations, making them more employable. But it's such a big bill, we're still kind of reviewing that to make sure that there's not a stinky thing in there that would make us not want to ask for that. And then we'll be asking for vetoes on Senate Bill 599 that offers some advantages to installment loan companies that many of them are payday loan companies that also have installment products. This is, we think, an attack on local control, since Springfield and Liberty in the city of St. Louis have passed some legislation locally to limit interest rates. Missouri Faith Voices is leading that veto campaign, and then our Smart Sentencing Coalition will be leading a veto campaign on the Senate substitute for Senate Bill 600, which was passed on the final day of session. That gets tough on crime, but it's not going to do anything to really help public safety. It'll just lead to longer incarceration, higher corrections costs, more plea deals, which means you don't really get your day in court to prove your innocence or your guilt. A lot of innocent people plead down to a charge that feels less risky than trying to prove their innocence, and then less judicial discretion, which we think is a mistake when that happens. And of course, we'll be carrying on defense of the FAIR maps that you heard about from Sean earlier. So there's a link in these slides that you may want to go to later to get yourself on their email list. We also continue to work with Tamara and Zach and our other federal allies on making sure there's adequate relief from the federal government. We were glad to see the announcement this week that our waiver has been approved for pandemic electronic benefits transfer. This means that kids that are in the free and reduced price school meals category, their households can receive on an EBT card, an electronic benefits transfer card, money that would have covered school meals eaten that they've had to have at home instead because of not doing school days at the school in March, April, and May. The benefit amount per child can be affected by the months the household is eligible to receive the benefit. The benefit per child, $57 for March, $125 for April, $120 for May. So a maximum of $302. That can matter a lot. We think that there will be 458,000 students that can qualify for the benefit. If your family was already on SNAP in March and you're in one of those districts, well, if you were on the free and reduced price program, you will automatically get the $302 on your next food stamp allotment. If you weren't on then, if you've lost your job and now have applied for food stamps, you're going to need to apply to get some of that benefit. And you can go to dss.mo.gov to find information about how to apply. We will continue to advocate for a good, strong federal package to pass. And we've included information here about how to find out who your U.S. representative is. All of us that live in Missouri have Senator Blunt and Senator Hawley as our senators, and their Twitter handles at Roy Blunt and at Hawley Mo. And then there are the Twitter handles also for our House members. I've made Lacey Clay and Emmanuel Cleaver bold because they voted yes on the HEROES Act. The other folks all voted no. So if Representative Clay or Representative Cleaver are your U.S. representatives, you'll want to email them, call their office, or send a tweet to them thanking them for their yes vote. And if, for example, Representative Jason Smith down in the Boot Heel is your House member, you might want to email him and say, Representative Smith, have you noticed how much hunger and housing trouble we're having in our area? Why wouldn't you vote yes on the HEROES Act that can offer some help that we really need right now? And it would be good for him to hear from you, so as well as the other folks there. Immediately following this webinar, we have another webinar starting at 3:30, examining Black women's health at the intersection of HIV, interpersonal violence, and the criminal legal system. That's from 3:30 to 5. You can still register for that at the events tab on our website. And you also can go to the events tab to find out about tomorrow's Smart Sentencing call, where we will be laying out more about the veto strategy, the veto campaign strategy for Senate Bill 600 on that call. We'll be meeting Friday, on Fridays until the veto campaign is over at 11 o'clock each Friday. And then once the veto campaign is over, we'll go to monthly meetings for the rest of the year so that we can keep marching toward clean slate expungement together and other things that we need to respond to. And then our Affordable Housing Coalition always meets on the second Monday. So the next one of that one is on June the 8th. And then our next webinar for everyone, we do every 2 weeks during legislative session, once a month during the months after the session ends. On the 18th of June, we will have another session. We'll have speakers. John Jinks, I think, will be one of those speakers, but I don't know the name of the other speaker yet. But they'll be talking about a program that's been instituted out of the KC Chamber of Commerce to help businesses prepare to hire and support returning citizens, people returning to the community from incarceration. We'll also update you on what's going on with all of our veto campaigns on the federal bills. Have Senator Blunt and Senator Hawley decided that they want to get behind legislation to offer some aid to Missouri to prevent further budget withholds or what. So we will update you on whatever the latest and greatest is on June the 18th. And that's how to get a hold of me. I'm Jeanette Mott Oxford, currently the executive director, but shortly to become the director of policy and organizing. We are in a search to hire an interim executive director and then a permanent executive director. I'll be switching roles in order to strengthen our organization. We think we want to get ready for the future in a particular way that will allow me to do more teaching of all kinds of people, but our younger staff members, but also some of you advocates as well, to spend more time with you on some things that I've learned in a 3-decade-plus long career of working in Missouri public policy. So that's how to reach me. And let me stop sharing these screens, the slides here, and see. I saw there was something in the chat box. Maybe it's a question. Do you think the governor will veto the one-time chance for some to vote by mail-in ballot? No, I don't, Josephine. I think that he will sign that bill. I think it's a pretty weak bill. It doesn't go nearly as far as it ought to protect our right to vote during a pandemic. But I think that here's what I saw happening, and if Representative McCreary and Representative Gundy are still with us, I'd love to see if this is what you thought as well. The fact that they took that voter suppression stuff out of the bill that was about mail-in voting said to me that they were getting a lot of push from people that said, hey, I want to be able to vote, but I want to protect myself. I don't want to go out and get coronavirus. I want to be able to vote safely. You know, I think there must have been a lot of pressure on senators and House members and on the governor's office about mail-in ballots, or I don't think they would have turned loose of the other stuff. But I could be wrong. Anybody want to weigh in on that watched it up close from the House floor?
Hi,
Hey there.
it's Tracy. I think you're absolutely right, Jeanette. Just keep in mind that all of these negotiations happen in the last, 48 hours of session as well. So I think if this had been a bill that we addressed more than a month ago, we might not have been so fortunate to get the photo ID requirements out of there. But
Right.
in order to not run the clock out, the majority party had to compromise. So we got very lucky with that. The other thing that was stripped from that omnibus elections reform bill had to do with some pretty bad changes to the initiative petition process as well. So the majority party wanted to create a lot more hoops and a lot more expenses in order for citizens like all of you to do things that the legislature refuses to do. So those were two big victories. But like Jeanette said, I do remain concerned that unless you fall into very specific categories with specific illnesses or over 65, you still have to go out and get your ballot notarized. And so that concerns me, that people would have to go out and possibly, there's no charge to have a ballot notarized, but you would still have to go wait in line at a bank or someplace where a notary would work.
Right, and you encounter a lot of people out there that aren't being very careful about their precautions. I have been very careful to stay at home until last Monday when I had to go solve a problem in Jefferson City. My computer had stopped working, which probably meant there'd been a storm, and I needed to drive down there and get my computer rebooted in Jeff City so I could get to some files. And we had a problem with our mail that I couldn't solve without being there in person. And I've encountered a lot of people that weren't wearing masks and that just didn't seem to be, very careful about staying away from people. And And there was just a real mix happening. So I think you can't guarantee if you go out to get something notarized and you're trying to be real careful because say you live with somebody with COPD and you're trying to protect them, that other people are being quite as careful about your health as you are about their health. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Other questions related to my presentation? Okay. Well, we do thank you for joining us today, and we ask you to stay in touch with us on a regular basis because a lot is happening right now. Will I show the first slide again, please? Do you mean the one at the end? You're welcome, Scott. There will be a page with the recording. Okay, I'll get there. There will be a page with the recording. It will say May 21st, Empowering You webinar, and it'll have the word presentation. Usually Rico gets that up for us not too long after this is over. So watch for it very, very soon. And that's the last slide, Kyra. So do you mean this slide here? That's the very first one. Let's see. Oh, okay, great. All right. So any last thoughts, anybody? All right, great. We're really glad that you joined us today, and please spread the word that these Empowering You webinars are available to people as a resource, and that if they get on our mailing list, they'll get an email blast from us each Friday sharing something that's really important from a social justice standpoint, usually with an actionable item in it that you can do something about. Tomorrow, I'll be sharing what happened in the legislative session in the weekly perspective column, but also calling people to action on the federal law and offering a link that lets people write their legislators from a template on our website. So we hope if you aren't already on our mailing list that you'll go get signed up. Thanks for being with us and for all the work that you do for your communities. You really do make the world a better place. All right, bye-bye.